From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gronowski, and welcome back to our Hour 2 of today's broadcast, coming to you live right now on FM and AM, as well as our video stream online or our podcast. We welcome you, whatever country you're listening to us on. We always enjoy hearing your feedback, your comments, your guest suggestions, because we cover a variety of topics, not just politics. We get into culture, economics, art, music, film, nutrition science, medicine, physics, astrophysics. We get into all kinds of topics on this program because we're guided by one simple mission, which is to challenge the toxic groupthink that holds us back in society and guide our conversation towards a principle of personhood, a principle that involves skin in the game, rolling up our sleeves and solving problems neighbor to neighbor, not relying on blame games and tearing one another down. Interesting story here developing that we're going to follow about the Arizona hearings going on with the election dispute. And it's interesting to see the divide that takes place between the establishment Republican faction and the Trump diehards. And it's interesting also to think how many folks, we saw what they did to Ron Paul. They rigged the primaries for Ron Paul in 2012 and 2008, changing the rules. And how many of those folks were totally mocking any of the complaints that Ron Paul's fans made? And now they have a rude awakening when their own favorite, Donald Trump, who's the sitting president, no less, not just a representative from Texas or, the sitting president, they now believe has had a rigged election go against him. And how quickly things can go against your own interests when you abandon principles of integrity and honesty, and when you worship democracy, the God that is always failing, because it cannot bind us together. Majority might makes right is not a great principle to create truths by. Having popularity contests is not how we decide truth in a civilized world. So I have a clip here from this Arizona hearing. They're asking Colonel Waldron, who's testifying in this hearing, about the overseas aspect of these voting machines. Let's see if we can go roll that clip real quick.
What we're talking about, it was Mr. Krebs? Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. He stated the most secure election in history. He stated we're not connected to the internet. He stated no votes leave this country. This is all things he's stated publicly.
So it's just a website, correct?
Right. So are you willing to say under oath that you have seen the connection to the internet? You have seen it go offshore to Germany, Frankfurt. Are these things that you have personally seen and can say that is not true?
Our white hat hackers, yes, they have that traffic in the packets.
So why would he make that kind of comment, do you think?
Either not knowing, believing the myth, or not wanting the truth to be known.
Thank you. So
it was very interesting to see these little narratives that they have fall apart with just a basic question. It was said that there was no overseas involvement with the tabulation process, but apparently that's in question. Here's another thing that's in question: the continual fear-mongering narrative that's continued to be lockstep agenda item for the PR firms that call themselves media. This is in Scientific American, which is one of their favored media outlets. In today's COVID-19 wars, the global scientific divide leans heavily in favor of active and sometimes even draconian public health interventions, including widespread locking down of non-essential business, mandating masks, restricting travel, and imposing quarantines. On the other side, some doctors, scientists, and public health officials are questioning the wisdom of this approach in the face of massive unknowns about their efficacy and in light of the clear and growing evidence that such measures may not be working in some cases and may also be causing net harm. As people are thrown out of work as a direct result of lockdowns, and as more and more families find themselves unable to cover their rent or food, there have been sharp increases in domestic violence, homelessness, and illegal drug use. So what do you know? Every now and then, the truth has a way of coming out, even in establishment media outlets that are lauded by the establishment. So that's the kind of thing that we have to hope for. That lies in the service of greed and state power and state violence are fragile. And the truth is rock solid. So it doesn't take a vast majority of people to understand the truth, to understand philosophy and ethics and anthropology. That's not necessarily required. All it takes is that small, solid stand for the truth. And then to act the truth out by innovating our way out of the calamities that the state and its crony corporate patrons create for us. For example, I say this a lot and I'll say it again. Don't buy the narrative that the green industry or big green and climate change politics knows the first thing about how to create effective clean energy that everybody can afford. They don't know how. They don't know how nuclear fusion works. They don't know how 24/7 solar panels work. They don't know any of that stuff. We've explored these cutting edge technologies and others on this very program. Because unlike the liars in the big green, fake green industry, we're not interested in getting giant billion-dollar subsidies for favored corporations. And that's why they lie and tell you the wind farms and solar panels are the future, when actually low-temperature nuclear fusion and other types of innovative energy processes that don't require massive government subsidies to make effective would be much better for the future. And so the same thing goes for medicine. They tell you, oh, we've got the moral high ground. We just want you to wear a mask, even though their own Danish study meticulously showed that the mask didn't do anything to help people. And they say, oh, we're just trying to do a lockdown. And then it shows, wait a second, the lockdown is actually delaying the natural herd immunity effect. And therefore, it's causing people who have immune compromised situations and the elderly who have eaten government subsidized fake nutrition like vegetable oils their whole life. They're in harm's way precisely because the lockdown is delaying the herd immunity from protecting them. And then the untold people who are dying all over the world in underdeveloped countries because of the economic calamity of shutting down all these countries, and the huge health effect of depression and abuse and homelessness and all the different things that these people keep ignoring for the most part. The problem that politics is that there is no skin in the game. You know, if a market entity did such a horrible job, they'd be prosecuted for fraud at the very least. But these government bureaucrats can just blabber and be little puppets for giant corporations and their industry interests and cause untold human suffering, untold agony, untold misery for children and adults and everybody. And they have no consequences. They get Emmys. They get glowing press. That's the way of the world. The world is based on the crowd. The crowd is a lie, Soren Kierkegaard. The crowd is a lie. That's why we have to stop caring about elections, because the elections are just the domain of the crowd. That's not where you create truth. You don't go to a crowd and expect the crowd to be the divine manifestation of truth. The crowd would tear apart Tesla before he could create alternating current electricity that has powered the world and done more for our lives than any president we've elected through a crowd ritual. The crowd will tear anybody apart that goes against their dumb lemming programming that people stoke into them. The crowd would tear Galileo apart. The crowd would tear Alexander Bell apart, to tear anybody apart who they get manipulated to hate out of envy, fear, jealousy. Don't go to the crowd to look for the truth. Evan Kilgore writes, breaking news, Maricopa County officials in Arizona allegedly didn't validate the signatures on 1.9 million mail-in ballots. See, the crowd doesn't want to have a conversation. The crowd wants to scapegoat. The crowd wants to have a common enemy, and they want their narrative to be 100% on the same note, on the same page, for stoking sacrifice and stoking scapegoating and blame games. But it's up to us to tell the truth. Word of mouth is better than the way information is dispersed in the establishment media. People see with their own eyes, they hear real world lived experiences, and they reject the flimsy, fragile narratives that are foisted upon us. JustTheNews.com illustrates an example. They have a story, amid ongoing school shutdowns, homeschooling rates skyrocket across the country. Rate of parents, the article says, intending to homeschool has doubled this year. That's the greatest news ever. The number of American children being homeschooled has jumped significantly this year, spurred by the ongoing pandemic and accompanying school shutdowns that have left much of American public and private education hanging in limbo for the foreseeable future. It goes on to say, when asked, 10% of respondents to Gallup's poll said they would be instructing their K through 12 students at home this year. That's a doubling from the 5% who said the same thing in 2019. This is excellent. Let's hope that we can build on that number for years to come. Let's hope that people don't march right back into government schooling. Daycare centers, once the media priestly cast says, go back to school, go back to school. We've got it figured out. We're scared. Too many of you are being homeschooled and private schooled. Too much disruption of our narrative. Go back to school, back to school. But what about the virus? Oh, that's okay. It's perfectly taken care of now. That's what they're going to do once they realize that they've killed the golden goose that lays their eggs of their narrative generation after generation. You cannot, if you get people unplugged from the government school monopoly, it's to be very hard for them to keep their narrative going for generations. One of their narratives of the ruling class is talked about in this online article, Spiked Online, I wanted to briefly cover. It's a long read, but it's on spiked-online.com by Joanna Williams, the columnist. And the title of the story is Critical Race Theory, a Ruling Class Ideology. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. We'll take a quick break. But when we return, we're going to explore this piece and how it illustrates another narrative that you think is from the little guy, from the vulnerable side, but is actually from those who are the elite exploiters of so much of our freedoms and so much of our wealth and prosperity. We'll return in just a moment and cover this column. Back in just a second.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck on a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Some law firms advertise that they are the largest. In law, largest is not always best. In fact, your case could get lost in the shuffle with one of those very large law firms. Catania are family-owned. They are Tampa Bay's attorneys representing clients who have experienced auto and motorcycle accidents. Your case will need a local attorney to get a settlement in your favor. Catania serving Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Referrals on request. Get the local law firm to represent you. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Catania, putting families first.
Car accident, motorcycle accident? Call the local attorneys today. Catania, offices Tampa. Not attorney spokesperson. Need a trusted hand sanitizer made in the USA? Physicians Group Hand Sanitizer reduces bacteria that can cause disease. Our liquid sanitizer is made of 75% ethanol alcohol. Our gel sanitizer is 70%. Neither require soap or water. Simply cover all surfaces of your hands, then rub them together until dry. Our hand sanitizer comes in 2 to 16-ounce bottles and gallon jugs. Order now at easyhandsanitizer.com and receive 10% off all orders over $100. That's easyhandsanitizer.com.
Hello, this is David Hanansky with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a 6th-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR. Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. Challenging the old ideas, the sacred cows of fear and exploitation by our corporate government, corporatist government, we'll call it. But I want to show you an example of a narrative that reinforces the kind of narrative that keeps us in a mental prison. And so it's this article on Spiked Online. Joanna Williams is the author. Critical Race Theory, a Ruling Class Ideology. It is embraced by today's political and cultural elites because it serves their interests. 2020 has been shaped by two things: coronavirus and our response to it has dominated every aspect of our lives, but something else has gripped us this year too: anti-racism. In May, shocked by the killing of George Floyd at the hands of Minneapolis police officer, people all around the world emerged from lockdown to participate in Black Lives Matter protests. In the UK, statues fell, public figures knelt in solidarity, and many people blacked out their social media posts for a day. Schools, universities, and workplaces stepped up by diversity training and anti-racist initiatives. There have been protests against racism in the past, of course, but this year has been different. Never before have people on every continent and in countries and towns facing their own unique problems turned out in such huge numbers to support the same cause. Never before have books like White Fragility, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and How to Be an Anti-Racist become international bestsellers. And never before has a protest movement had such establishment backing. In the United Kingdom, BLM has been publicly endorsed by the royal family, the Football Premier League, and senior politicians. Multinational corporations have got in on the act too. Ice cream maker Ben & Jerry's has pledged to do all it can to dismantle white supremacy, while elite universities have issued statements denouncing their own institutional racism. The mainstreaming and elite backing of anti-racism initiatives speaks to a new understanding of racism. Critical race theory, CRT, used to be a minority pursuit, an obscure academic interest. In 2020, it provided the rationale for protests, books, diversity workshops, and school lessons. In June, Channel 4 screened The School That Tried to End Racism, a documentary series that followed the progress of children made to undergo an anti-racist re-education program based upon principles of critical race theory. New phrases entered our vocabulary. Terms like systemic racism, unconscious bias, white privilege, cultural appropriation, reparations, microaggression, and intersectionality migrated from academics and activists to newspapers, radio discussions, charity campaigns, and school lessons. President Trump and Kimi Badenoch, the UK's Minister for Equalities, made speeches explicitly naming critical race theory and calling out its perniciousness. So let's just scroll through this article to get some more points, because this is a great example of a narrative that distracts from having real justice. When racism is seen in this way, racism is understood as systemic, that is, built into the very fabric of societies designed by white people for the benefit of white people. Proponents of critical race theory argue that ideas of white superiority and black inferiority are intrinsic to our language, culture, and interpretations of history. Every aspect of our daily lives, from education, policing, the health service, and employment, assumes a white norm, they argue, and this makes a mockery of equality before the law and the liberal notion of equality of opportunity. As Renee Edolodge explains in Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, quote, if you're white, your race will almost certainly positively impact your life's trajectory in some way, and you probably won't even notice it. So this is what we're dealing with. This ideology is something that comes from the elites, the giant corporations. People with the highest privilege are the ones that have jumped onto this ideology and backed it every step of the way. This is not something that has been powered by the average family or the person who is on the margins of society. This has been championed by the most elite, the ones who have backed wars, the ones who have backed banker bailouts, the ones who have destroyed our jobs for a privileged few corporations. This is not something that gets justice. It's something that gets in the way of justice. The article continues, this elite anti-racist project is terrible for everyone else. Black and white people alike are reduced to their skin color and set in opposition to one another. So this is something we have to reject, because this kind of mind virus ideology, critical race theory, is keeping people locked up of all race backgrounds, keeping their wealth destroyed through regulations and taxation and corporate welfare, keeping people occupied with wicked foreign policy like Biden just got elected to continue to do. This is the fruit, the rotten fruit of a decadent, rich, arrogant, elitist ideology like critical race theory.
There is all kinds of lunacy going on. It's of 2020.
Weekdays 11 to 2.
I'm just so fed up with these Democrats. It's unbelievable.
Get it straight from Chris Bryant.
There's stuff with the critical that makes me sick.
It's the Chris Bryant Show.
This has just got me going off.
And the left is waging war against the police in the United States.
Telling it like it is.
Thanks profusely for getting to the point. You're a voice of reason and sea of idiots.
The Chris Bryant Show. Weekdays 11 to 2. News Talk 1040 WHPO.
Governors considering tougher restrictions as COVID-19 cases continue to rise. California's Gavin Newsom says stay-at-home orders are a possibility.
That positivity rate is now at 6.2% over a 14-day period.
Ohio Governor Mike DeWine telling state employees to work from home while the nation waits on a vaccine.
Shipment For example, the Pfizer could come as early as December 15th, the first shipment. Moderna could come as early as December 22nd. Again, that's subject to approval, but we certainly are getting ready for that.
DeWine also announcing a $20 million program to improve indoor air quality at nursing homes, assisted living centers, and adult day centers. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season comes to an end today with an unprecedented 30 named storms. Tomorrow's NFL game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens has been postponed to Wednesday over concerns about COVID-19. Daria Albinger, ABC News.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. I'm David Gronowski, and now it's time for our Veterans Radio segment we do every Monday. And to do that, we work with an excellent group which is really leading a new movement, a renaissance of proper foreign policy from the right, from a conservative perspective, and that is bringourtroopshome.us. And we have with us now their founder, Sergeant Dan McKnight, joins us. How you doing, Dan?
David, I'm doing great. Happy belated Thanksgiving, and hope you had all the turkey and cranberry dressing that you could handle.
Well, it was a great time to get a break from the news cycle, but here we are with gratitude in our hearts, ready to go, right? Ready to fight for truth and ready to fight for the Constitution and a good foreign policy, right?
We're always ready for that, David, and I was just listening to your segment a minute ago, and I want to tell you, you're right about margarine and butter, if nothing else from just a taste standpoint. You're right.
That's so
hey,
true.
I wanted to tell you a quick, I'll say it again, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, that's so true, yeah.
Yep. I just wanted to tell you a quick story from about this time 2 years ago. We're talking about the drawdown in Afghanistan, and something that has to happen before that drawdown and that war can actually come to an end. In January 2019, I was actually headed to the Boise, Idaho airport for a quick business trip. I requested an Uber, and I was kind of mildly excited, if maybe even a little apprehensive, when I saw on the app that my Uber driver spoke Pashto, which is the native tongue to almost half of the country in Afghanistan. I learned a few very simple Pashto phrases while I was deployed there with the Army in 2005, 2006, and 2007. But since my time in Afghanistan, I hadn't actually spoken about the war to most of my friends or my family, and very few knew all the details about my time in country. So I was kind of excited to speak to a total stranger about a country that I had tried so hard to forget. When my Uber driver arrived, I sat in the front seat, which is something that I never do, but for some reason I did this time. And I began talking to the driver and asking him about his Uber profile and specifically about his ability to speak Pashto. And I told him I'd been in Afghanistan for 18 months in 2005, 6, and 7, and he told me that he'd been an interpreter for the U.S. Army during that same time. I turned and looked at him, David, for the first time, and slowly the recognition began to form. My Uber driver was actually one of my interpreters that I served with in the Pesh River Valley in northeastern Afghanistan. His name was Untitled. I knew him for my time in Afghanistan 15 years before. Audi, which is how we knew him, had served 10 years as an interpreter for the United States. And Terps, as we called them, were invaluable for our mission there. They would translate for all manners of meetings with local village elders, workers, the Afghan National Army troops, etc. And Terps would even go with us to the local bazaar or the local market and help us negotiate the best price for bootlegged DVDs. Audi explained to me that he had been granted a very slow process special immigrant visa to come to the United States with his wife and children. The U.S. required 10 years of honorable interpreter service before he was even able to apply, and it took another 2 years to process his visa. During his time serving as an interpreter, and then with the waiting period, he and his family were constantly in hiding in his own country. The Taliban treated the interpreters very poorly, and David, oftentimes they were even killed for conspiring with the great Satan. I was happy to reconnect with Adi. I'm happy he's here. I see him frequently. I was happy that he was able to come to America and live in relative peace. He explained to me how foreign the idea of travel was to him and his family. They had just taken a road trip for Thanksgiving 2 years ago to California to visit his family, and he explained that in Afghanistan, road trips were completely and strictly forbidden. He and I had several conversations over the following weeks, and he shared his desires for Afghanistan, his desires for the American military to leave and to support a new generation of Afghan citizens who wanted to transform their country and modernize their government and beliefs. He spoke fondly of the Afghanistan that he knew as a child, and he shared amazing pictures with me. It was not the Afghanistan that I knew. President Trump is attempting to end this endless war and the unauthorized war that he inherited 4 years ago. He's promised to bring our troops home before he leaves office. It's a logistical hurdle, David. If you think about the monumental effort that's going to take, it seems more and more difficult every day and every year that we're still there. But one of the forgotten issues that must be addressed immediately and it's beyond the questions of equipment and personnel and security and support of the Afghan military, stability in the region, battling terrorism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's what will America do to support those that supported us during our multi-generational war. President Trump and his woefully schizophrenic advisors, they must address the special immigrant visa program and help relocate the Afghan people who gave service to the American military. It is but just one piece of logistical operation that must successfully be completed in order for the United States to turn off the lights and close the door on the unauthorized and ill-advised war in Afghanistan.
Well, Dan,
joining us today,
we're going to try to get her. We're going to try to get her on. Heather Brandon Smith is our guest. You can set up the opening for her, and we've got a number issue that's not going through. But go ahead and tell us about our guest.
Sure, absolutely. Heather is joining us from the FCNL, which is the Friends Committee on National Legislation. She's the Legislative Director for Militarism and Human Rights, and she leads the FCNL's work to repeal the current war authorization and promote respect for human rights and international law, and to reduce the U.S. armed interventions around the world. Heather's an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University, and her writing has appeared in magazines like The Hill, Lawfare, Just Security, Intercross, and the American Conservative Magazine. Do we have her on the line? If not, we could probably maybe take a quick break and come back to her.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to get her back online. Had a little issue with connecting with her, so we'll take a quick break and we'll return on Veterans Radio, brought to you by BringOurTroopsHome.us, whose founder is with us now, Sergeant Dan McKnight. We're looking forward to unpacking more about foreign policy and what's going to happen next in this weird, wild time of politics we're in here in America. We'll be back after these short messages.
Hello, this is David Hronowski with A Neighbor's Choice. I've got a mission for you. I'm a big believer in eating family farm-raised, high-quality, grass-fed beef. That's why I'm a frequent customer of White Oak Pasture, a sixth-generation beautiful farm in southwest Georgia. Support sustainable, delicious meat of the highest quality. Ask for White Oak Pasture's beef at your local grocery here in Florida, or go to whiteoakpastures.com, and first-time customers get 20% off on purchases with our exclusive coupon code NEIGHBOR.
Do you despise lawyers? That may be the case until you need one. If you've been in an auto accident and need legal advice, go to the local attorneys that have served Tampa Bay families for over 28 years. Catania and Catania. They are family owned. They understand your needs with legal advice. When you need legal representation, Catania will care for your case from the beginning to final settlement. You won't need to worry. Catania will represent you throughout the entire process. Auto and motorcycle accidents are too frequent in Florida. If you've been a victim, contact Catania. They don't get paid if you don't get paid. Referrals on request. Contact Catania, putting families first.
Offices Tampa, non-attorney spokesperson.
Are you ready to transform your career? Jess Smith was too. She was stuck in a job that was controlling her life, consuming her free time, and offering little opportunity for growing her pay. Then she found FinTech Mortgage Association, and she never looked back. FinTech Mortgage Association makes home lending simple, and they take care of home buyers like family. Using technology to make everyone's life easier, FinTech Mortgage Association equips each of their loan solutions architects with the tools they need to build a career with a schedule they control, a product they can take pride in, and an earning potential that is life-changing. Unleash your true potential. Join FinTech Mortgage Association. Visit finmay.com. That's FINMAE.com. You're in charge now. NMLS ID 1492187. Equal housing lender.
Not ready to go to your favorite seafood restaurant? Get the highest quality fish for less delivered straight to your door by Fast Fresh Seafood. Order our fresh hot snapper, grouper, mahi, and more. They're boneless, skinless, flash frozen the same day, and individually vacuum wrapped. Pick the size filet you want, the amount you want, and checkout's easy at fastfreshseafood.com. The best thing, every fish is on sale. FastFreshSeafood.com. Caught fresh for you, delivered straight to you. Stay home and stay safe.
Hello, David Gronowski here. You're listening to a Neighbor's Choice radio program, perhaps on one of our affiliate stations. We're glad to have you there on FM, AM, or perhaps on our video stream, or our podcast, or our website at neighborschoice.com. However you're finding us, we're glad to have you here because this is one of our favorite segments that we do, and that's Veterans Radio. We do that with Sergeant Dan McKnight, founder of BringOurTroopsHome.us, which is engaged in a real renaissance of true foreign policy dialogue and change in this country. And Dan, you have a friend that you've brought on the program with us, right?
Yep, we've got with us today from the FCNL, we've got Heather. And Heather, I'm sorry you missed the first part. How are you today?
I am well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we were just telling the story of how I got an Uber 2 years ago in Boise, Idaho, and jumped inside and realized it was my interpreter from Afghanistan had finally made his way to America and was living in my hometown.
Oh my goodness, that's incredible.
Yeah, and we were talking about drawing down the war in Afghanistan, and that the logistics involved, of course, moving all the metal and the pieces and the equipment, but one of the most important things of ending that war is what about the human involvement and the special immigration visas that need to be issued for those that helped America in this unauthorized and unnecessary war in Afghanistan. And I wanted to bring you on and talk to you about FCNL's work.
Oh, great. Thank you. I'm so glad. I really appreciate you inviting me to be with you here. And I really appreciate your focus on, the human element of this war in Afghanistan, whether it be, the interpreters who worked alongside the U.S. military or, the people of Afghanistan who have suffered so much, throughout this war. I really think there needs to be more of a focus on this. When we talk about the need to withdraw and we talk about the need to do this responsibly.
I read a great article on responsible statecraft today, and they were talking about just the amount of bottled water that the Americans will leave behind when they leave Afghanistan. One unit, one battalion left behind 420,000 bottles of water, which is 50 miles of bottled water standing side by side. It seems almost insurmountable, but it's logistically possible, right? Getting out of Afghanistan, it is possible.
Indeed, yes, it absolutely is possible. And when we talk about getting out of Afghanistan, though, we do need to look at all of the different elements that the U.S. needs to invest in and able to do this responsibly and not be in a position where we go back in again, like what happened with Iraq. So, as you mentioned, the FCNL, the Friends Committee on National Legislation, we have come up with a set of recommendations for what this responsible withdrawal looks like. So, the first element is, sort of you were talking about the full military withdrawal and everything that goes along with that, logistically. But then also, we need other elements to be able to do this properly. For example, we need ramped up bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. We need for the U.S. to push for a comprehensive ceasefire, to support the intra-Afghan peace talks, to include women, youth, and minorities in a meaningful way. I don't know if your listeners know this, but when women are involved in negotiating peace agreements, they are 35% more likely to lead to a peace that lasts for 15 years or longer. So this is, obviously it's about, including all elements of Afghan society, but it's also more efficient and successful. So we need to sort of look at these things that have been done in the past, when negotiating peace, learn from them and apply them to the situation in Afghanistan. The other two things that, we advocate for relate to development assistance. The U.S. has provided a ton of development assistance to Afghanistan, but we've often focused on these sort of big, flashy projects that can be quite wasteful, can lead to corruption, which then in turn leads to more violence. So, we really need to go small. We need to focus on tailored programs that are focused on what the local needs are in Afghanistan. And then the final recommendation that we have is to not leave behind the sort of residual counterterrorism force that has been talked about a lot. Really, that is just continuing the war. It's doing it secretly and with less accountability. It's just as violent and destructive, and it kind of keeps this frame that terrorism is something that can be entirely eliminated, through bombing or through violence. Terrorism, unfortunately, is something that has always existed. It's something that needs to be managed, and just sort of being in there and having this capability to continue to kill people as a matter of first resort is just going to continue to destabilize the country, and as I mentioned, could end up with the U.S. going back in there, which is the last thing that anybody wants.
We're speaking with Heather
Absolutely.
Brandon Smith, who's the FCNL Legislative Director for Militarism and Human Rights, and we're exploring what needs to take place to actually end the Afghanistan war. I want to kick it back to you, Dan, for any other questions.
Sure, and in DC, FCNL's office sits right there at the corner. And David, I think when we were in DC last year, you might have even walked right past this with me. We were on 2nd Avenue and C Street Northeast, and right across the street from their office is the Russell Senate Office Building, which is where my senator from the great state of Idaho, Jim Risch, that's where his office sits. And Heather, you probably know this, but I've been working really hard to influence Senator Risch because he's the chairman of the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. And he's my senator. I'm in a small state, relatively, from a population base, so I have a real good access to a very powerful man in foreign policy. And one of my meetings I had with him, I mentioned I was working with your state director here in Idaho from the FCNL, Eric Oliver, and Senator Risch said, "Oh yes, the FCNL. Every day I get to walk past their building on my way to the Russell Senate Office Building, and I see their sign, 'War is not the answer.'" He knows FCNL. He knows Bring Our Troops Home. He knows that people from political spectrum, left to right, are working together to end the endless war. And I wanted to tell you that story because it validates the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you telling me that story. That is really fantastic to know. I mean, you are absolutely right when you say that Senator Jim Risch is in a really powerful position when it comes to these wars. He's the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That is the committee that approves authorizations for the use of military force. Any effort to repeal existing war authorizations, as we would sort of call them, would have to really go through him and get approval by him. So, it's really fantastic that he sees FCNL and that he knows that there is this sort of, cross-partisan, bipartisan effort to really make a difference when it comes to ending these wars. And actually, you reminded me of one thing that, our two groups did recently collaborate on, which is the effort to repeal the Iraq War authorization. The sort of technical term is the Authorization for the Use of Military Force, which is abbreviated to AUMF, and so we call the Iraq War authorization often the Iraq AUMF. And you just recently, bringourtroopshome.us, FCNL, along with 8 other groups spanning the political aisles, from the ACLU to Concerned Veterans for America. We all sort of came together and wrote this letter, calling for repeal of this Iraq War Authorization, because groups across the political aisle all support this. The Heritage Foundation supports this. This is something that there's just a lot of hope that is something that we can do. Hopefully either this year, or there is an opportunity now, or if not, next year we would love to see a repeal of this war authorization. It's been on the books since 2002. It's high time to get it off the books and to sort of really get us back in the position where Congress makes the decisions about where we go to war and where we expand wars to. So yeah, that's really wonderful to hear that your Senator Rich, is engaged in this issue, and I would love to see him be more active on this.
David, we had Danny Scherzen on with us last week, and so we've talked about this. This is a transpartisan issue. It goes left, right, top to bottom, every different political spectrum, and it's something that everybody can agree on. And you talk about this AUMF. That's our biggest push as right of center veterans. We're taking a conservative angle. We're we're trying to influence our legislators and just getting Congress to reclaim that authority and repeal the AUMF and boldly put your name on the line. If you think that national interests are at stake, put your name on the line and declare war. And we know they won't do it because they know there's not a real, tangible national threat there.
Yeah, it is really one of those tricky things, isn't it? As I mentioned, we've got this big effort right now to try and repeal the Iraq War Authorization, but the big AUMF problem is the 2001 AUMF that was passed after the 9/11 attacks to, authorize the president to use force against those who attacked the U.S. on 9/11 and those who harbored them, which is generally understood to be Al-Qaeda, and then the Taliban, who harbored Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And that law has since been used to justify, at least from what we know of from public reporting, 41 operations in 19 countries, without Congress approving any of those specifically, other than that very first, vote in 2001. The vast majority of members of Congress have never voted on these wars. So we're really hoping. There has been some really great movement, over the last few years, to where Congress has started to reclaim their authority. Very recently there was a war powers resolution passed in relation to Iran, following the strike that listeners might remember in January, where an Iranian general was assassinated with a U.S. drone attack. And Congress sort of stepped in and said, all right, you need to stop. We're going to use the War Powers Resolution that was passed in 1973 and say that, you need to terminate any hostilities against Iran. So, we have seen Congress stepping up and starting to reclaim their constitutional war powers. And so there is some real hope that we could make, if we keep pushing, Congress will keep going in that direction, and, we'll repeal these AUMFs and get back in the driver's seat of deciding, whether and when the U.S. chooses war.
Right, and we know the ones that have been good on this issue for a long time, like Barbara Lee in California and Ro Khanna, Rand Paul, that have been good on these issues of foreign policy. But we're starting to see others like Thomas Massey and Andy Biggs. Nancy Mace was just elected as a freshman. There's others that are coming to the table now that are saying enough is enough. We don't need these endless wars, and Congress needs to reclaim their authority. And I commend Barbara Lee. I am not even ashamed a little bit of being right of center. I'm very conservative in my personal belief. But Barbara Lee is someone that I've looked up to since 2001, when she was the only opposing vote on the AUMF, and she has stood by that position since. And I'm very proud of her for that.
That's really wonderful to hear, and it's really great to talk to someone, who is fervently, on the right of these things, just to sort of show everyone that this is not a partisan issue. this is a constitutional issue. This is about getting Congress to make those decisions and look at whether we should be at war. That was the whole frame of the Constitution. They wanted to make it hard to go to war, and Barbara Lee recognized that, and she's struggling with that decision. You can see online her speech that she gave on the floor of the House, where she was talking about how she was really wrestling with this decision, and it just seemed like the wrong way to go. And her father was in the military. She came from a military family, and in a sense, it seems to have given her more of an appreciation of just how serious it really is to make the decision to go to war. So I really appreciate you mentioning, Barbara Lee there. I will actually sort of return the favor by noting that Congressman Matt Gaetz has actually been really fantastic on these issues. There was an effort to prohibit war with Iran last year through the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. That was called the Carnegie Amendment. So Will Carner from California and then Matt Gaetz from Florida teamed up together across the aisle to say, no, the president does not have the authority to go to war with Iran, and we're going to prohibit funding for that. So, yeah, there really is increasing bipartisan support for these initiatives, which is fantastic.
Absolutely. And David, Congressman Gaetz is from your neck of the woods.
Yeah, he is, and he's really good on the foreign policy stuff from what I've heard. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you, we have Heather Brandon Smith with us. She's legislative director for FCNL. What do you think in this last moment about where the state of the anti-war or, restrained foreign policy agenda is heading into the next 4 years?
That's a really great question. I am very hopeful, that sort of restraint is going to be in sort of more of the future of U.S. foreign policy. And because if you look back on the last nearly 2 decades of this, we call it endless war, we hope it isn't endless, it really has not been successful. We've had over 800,000 people killed in these wars. Over 335,000 have been civilians. More than 7,000 U.S. troops have been killed, and 35 million people have been displaced. So I think that, going forward, looking at what's happened over the last, 19 years, looking at the failures, I'm really hopeful that we will have a sort of, recalibration of U.S. foreign policy to focus on diplomacy, focus on peace building, focus on the prevention of conflict and other means of dealing with terrorism that aren't just, going to war using a bomb as a first resort.
Well, Heather, it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and thank you, Dan, for bringing this conversation together. Very informative. Any last thoughts?
For more information about the movement, bringourtroopshome.us.
Well, very good. And thank you again, Heather, for joining us. And you can visit Heather Brandon Smith's website at fcnl.org and learn more about what they're doing. That's the Friends Committee on National Legislation at fcnl.org. And as Dan McKnight said, bringourtroopshome.us is where you got to go to keep up with what Dan's doing. Always a pleasure to have a real foreign policy discussion on broadcast airwaves. And who better to do it than with you? Thank you for joining us. Email me, hello@aneighborschoice.com to stay in touch. Godspeed.
For news, talk,